I am so delighted to welcome you to Force Multiplier's launch of its Blue Digital Media Fund. I'm Ann Weisberg, and I'm a proud Democrat of Connecticut, and I'm even prouder member of the Force Multiplier's leadership team. This fund is new for us in many ways. It's a totally new subject. Online information and message spreading, how that works, was a steep learning curve for all of us. And it's a new approach to accomplishing our fundamental objective, which is taking back the House and closing the gap in the Senate. We are so grateful to you for placing your trust in us and that you are here to learn more about the fund. The story of the why we started this fund really starts back in February when Courier News did a free event for our community on the impact of online propaganda on the 2024 election. If you didn't make it, I encourage you to watch the presentation. It's on our website at under the Media Fund tab. And suffice it to say that it made a powerful case for why we, meaning people who care about democracy and electing Democrats, need to have a much bigger presence online. So much of what happens online is invisible to most of us. That's certainly true for me, and it may be true for many of you. It's really hard to see the impact. So I'm going to give you 3 facts to illustrate what we're talking about here. Fact number 1, 9 of the top 10 online shows are right-leaning. That means they invited Trump on their shows, and Trump ended up reaching an audience of 23.5 million American adults on average each week, almost 4 times the reach of Harris. Number 2, these shows and other online media aren't news organizations or even political sites in the traditional sense of the word, but they amplify right-wing messaging and propaganda. So, for example, Bloomberg did a big analysis and found that the top broadcasters described American men as, quote, victims of a Democratic campaign to strip them of their power, even though none of these broadcasters style themselves as political pundits. In fact, they're more trusted because they don't style themselves as political pundits. Fact number 3, 54% of Americans and 78% of young American adults get their news primarily online. And again, not necessarily from news sources. In fact, many of them are passive news recipients, meaning they don't seek the news. The news comes to them online through whatever they're watching or listening to, whether it's news related or not. In sum, many American voters and non-voters are getting their information that influences how they vote and whether they vote at all online. That's why Force Multiplier decided we need to help build the online infrastructure that will reach these voters with accurate news and democratic, meaning small d and big D messaging. That's the goal of the Blue Digital Media Fund. So once we decided to create the fund, we did what we always do. We did the research so you don't have to. I was on the team that determined the criteria and investigated the groups. And it was a steep learning curve for me and everybody else on the team, for sure. Among the criteria we used to arrive at the 3 groups in the fund, Courier Newsroom, Onyx Impact, and Chorus, are these 3. Number 1, the group has a track record of reaching audiences that are not served by mainstream media and or are in local news deserts. In other words, they're not just preaching to the choir. Number 2, the group has a clear strategy for growth and expanding its reach, including a strategy for amplifying their messaging and networks. Number 3, the group nurtures and develops authentic and trusted messengers who are part of their audience's culture. These trusted messengers can be either influencers, which is a fancy word for anybody who has a large online following, or content creators, which basically means people who produce and share various forms of content online to engage an audience and build a following. Now that you know how we identified the groups in our Blue Digital Media Fund, let me turn to our speakers. Tara McGowan is the founder and publisher of Courier Newsroom, a former political strategist and reporter or journalist. She has led dozens of multi-million-dollar digital advertising and marketing campaigns, including President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Tara has seen firsthand how America's information crisis has contributed to the rising threat of authoritarianism and the deterioration of social trust. Tara founded Courier Newsroom in 2019 and has grown it into the trusted source of progressive news on social media. It has a total weekly audience of about 70 million people across all platforms and is currently the 3rd largest media organization on TikTok. Woohoo! I've never used TikTok, but I know that's important. Okay. Esosa is the founder and CEO of Onyx Impact, an organization created to better understand and combat disinformation targeting Black online communities and increase Black civic engagement. Esosa was previously Deputy Executive Director of Fair Fight Action, a voting rights organization founded by Stacey Abrams, where she led the organization's pro-democracy reform efforts with a focus on combating disinformation and voting policy reform, while overseeing the organization's research, communications, political, and organizing teams. So we are thrilled to have these 2 leaders with us tonight. Here's how we're going to spend the rest of the hour together. Tara and Esosa will each speak about their organizations, what they are doing, and what they see as the online media landscape. Then they will engage in a bit of a dialogue with each other before we open it up to questions from you, which we would like you to put in the chat. We have learned that we all get the most out of the Q&A section of this meeting if the chat is used exclusively for questions for our speakers. You may be tempted to use the chat to respond to what our speakers are saying in the moment or make some comments or debate, but please don't. Thank you very much. At the end of our hour together, we will have a short information session for anyone who wants to learn more about Force Multiplier, who we are and what we do. If you'd like to join us, just stay on the Zoom. So with that, over to you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you everybody for being here on your Tuesday afternoon or evening. I'm so honored to be speaking to all of you. If only the Democratic Party cared as much about figuring out what we've done wrong and how to win as this community, I think we'd all be in better shape right now. But I really am just humbled by this community and just filled with gratitude because you guys have already contributed to Esosa and I's organization by being here tonight, which we're just really, really grateful for. So again, thank you for having me. Anne did a great job on my bio, a few small tweaks. We are in the top 5 media brands on TikTok, mostly among young people. And I did not run Obama's re-election campaign, but I think that was just the way that it's written. I was on his digital team, but before that was a journalist at 60 Minutes and Frontline. And I wrote the concept paper for Courier just a few months after the 2016 election, the first time we were horrified by Trump's win for the White House. And I had been running the largest digital ad program to support Hillary Clinton and oppose Donald Trump in that election for an organization called Priorities. And I really felt that one of the primary reasons that we lost at that time, which has only been exacerbated in the years since, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, was the asymmetry in the media and how Republicans and Trump in particular were really, really focused on being first movers on new media platforms and technology. That continues, whereas Democrats always seem to be fighting the last war when it comes to communication strategy for a lot of reasons. I could talk extensively about if you guys want to ask questions about it in the chat later. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about Courier. So I finally got it off the ground with an amazing team in 2019. We are a pro-democracy media network that focuses on reaching passive news consumers where they are online with good factual local and national news and information in the ways people consume information today, which is always evolving. So we're a very nimble organization. We call our audiences news avoidant, but there's a few different ways to describe them. These are folks who do not pay through paywalls, where most local and national journalism is trapped today. They don't watch cable news, and they are not regularly politically or civically engaged. These are our low turnout voters, our new voters, our non-voters. Our casual voters is another term that's quite popular now, given the drop off of voters from the 2020 presidential to the 2024 presidential election, especially among younger people and Democrats, sadly. And so I really felt that Democrats and the progressive movement were spending so much money on advertising, and most of it was going to swing or independent older voters in battleground states. And they were taking for granted a lot of people who share left-leaning or progressive values, but who were not actually being engaged readily with narratives that were aligned with progressive or democratic values for a whole bunch of reasons I could talk about at length. But essentially, the legacy media that used to be, described as the liberal media, when right-wing media was created because they felt the media was liberal, traditional media was in a defensive posture. So they felt they needed to both sides everything. And that also meant platforming lies and liars as equivalent to facts and truth. And that put us in quite a pickle because Democrats had relied on the media for being the arbiters of truth and sort of the referees between liars and truth tellers. And with that no longer in place, they were only relying on advertising to get their message across, which has been decreasingly effective for so many reasons. So I really wanted to build a media network that focused on reaching audiences where they are on social media through email, newsletters, and SMS with good local and national journalism that was values driven. We're very transparent about our values, and I wanted to do it for a very specific and measurable purpose. I wanted to increase voter turnout in elections. And not to say just Democratic turnout, but these are folks who share our values that we want to communicate with. And so I wanted to create a news organization that actually measurably increased voter turnout and civic participation among audiences that are not relied on to turn out in most elections, but whether they turn out or not, that often determines the outcome of elections. So we started out in 2019 in 6 states across the country, and over the past 6 years, we have expanded to 11 states, and we launched a national brand just called Courier about a year and a half ago that has exploded on TikTok and Instagram, especially with people under 40 who are multiracial, which is a huge audience that a lot of folks did not turn out or switched their votes in this last election and haven't been engaged in really authentic ways by Democrats. And so we're trying to fill that void. We measure the impact of our reporting, which is very unusual for a news organization. We run what's called randomized control treatment experiments. So similar to medical trials, we will suppress a section of our newsletter audience, for instance, and take out the political reporting and survey that audience against the audience that gets our political reporting in their newsletters before and after a period of time, and have shown that we actually increase support for Democrats and values-aligned candidates simply through the drip of our reporting that they're getting for free. We've also trained our journalists to be content creators and influencers. They are the faces and the voices of vertical video explainers on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. We're constantly moving to where our audiences are to get their attention and to, as we say, or as Steve Bannon says, flood the zone. Because the way that the information ecosystem exists today, it's very fractured, distributed. It's about self-selection and passive consumption. It really is a volume game that we have been losing. We need a lot more media outlets and content providers and creators that are, in their own authentic way, driving our narratives and our stories offensively. Because the reason that the right has been able to be dominant when their policies are so deeply unpopular by Americans is because they have built a media ecosystem that allows them to drive the offensive narrative. They are able to make DEI a thing that is seen as negatively, or they are able to make trans students in sports an issue of national import when it affects a very, very small minority of Americans. They do that because they have built this infrastructure over the years, and it puts Democrats on the defensive. And you are always losing when you are on the defensive. So, in order for us to actually take over the offensive narratives in this country, we have to have a media ecosystem that we control, that is in line with our values. And that's what we've started to build at Courier. And so we now have over 7.8 million subscribers across the network, but our reach is over 100 million a week across Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, email, SMS. You name it, every digital platform I'm sure many of you are not on, which I'm very envious of, because that is better for your mental health and attention spans. But it is where the majority of Americans are that we need to be communicating with. So I'm happy to answer a ton more questions and talk. I know that the work that Force Multiplier is doing with this fund is supporting our work in Michigan specifically. That is one of our original newsrooms, the Gander. I'm so proud of the team on the ground there. They've been doing incredible reporting at the state house level and localizing the impacts of this administration on everything from what the impacts of the Medicaid cuts in the horrific betrayal of a bill will do to Michiganders, to the illegal ICE raids and kidnappings that are happening across the state, to accountability of Republican electeds in that state and the really horrific policies that they are advancing. And they do that work in a multitude of ways. They report stories, they do explainer videos, they do graphics on Instagram, any way that we can get the stories and the facts across to people in this crazy saturated media environment is how we've trained our newsrooms. So we're just so grateful for this community support and this community doing everything that you guys do on behalf of our democracy. And I will close it there because I can't wait to hear Esosa talk about her work that I'm so excited about and we work very closely together on. So the fact that we both got to be your two stars tonight is just the cherry on top. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you to Force Multiplier and everyone that is joining tonight and choosing to move in a time period where we are seeing so much inaction, and in a time period where we're in a crisis, right? What I do and who I am as you heard, as a founder of something called Onyx Impact, and we are focused on fighting harmful narratives targeting Black communities and going on offense in these strategies, right? And so, how did I start? I have been involved in research and policy and messaging for quite a long time, since and helped build up was one of the founding members of Fair Fight Action, a voting rights organization, and so spent so much time thinking about how do we talk to Black voters in a way that's going to empower them. And if you can remember in 2020, it unfortunately became a situation where you couldn't really talk to Black voters you couldn't talk to voters, right, without talking about mis and disinformation because of all of the nonsense that was spreading. And so I became a leader in the broader nonprofit world and trying to make sure that folks understood what was happening here, right? Because in many ways, people are still failing to realize what we're up against, what we're dealing with, right? And we've got misinformation. We've got disinformation, which is intentional. We've got malinformation, which has kernels of truth, right? Or is true and used with the intent to harm. And what we are seeing is what happens to nation states, what happens to democracies in particular, that are democracies are so susceptible to lies because of the fact that we allow free speech. And so what's so important here is to remember that disinformation works on everybody. It works on me, it works on y'all. And it works because our brains are built in a very similar way. And that's that the more times we hear something, the more likely we are to believe it's true, and the more likely we are to believe other people believe it's true as well. Our brains are wired to substitute repetition for truth, fundamentally. And if that is the case, and you are not able to get any type of level of repetition or amplification, you are not going to be able to spread your message, especially when we move from disinformation, which is, let's say it's you're swatting individual narratives or individual bees, right, to a propaganda environment, a state-sponsored propaganda environment where it's a swarm of bees all around, right? You're then in a situation, we're now in a situation where in the era of propaganda, if amplification and repetition are fundamentally all that matter in order to move truth, right? And you're not going to be able to without understanding this. And so we realized this very early on, and even at Verify, we did counter disinformation online digital efforts that moved tens of thousands of Black folks in Georgia in particular out of harmful online spaces into more healthy spaces, moving into an election, turning down the temperature considerably in other spaces that were acting to harm Black folks. And then in 2022, I was asked to be the senior advisor on the Abrams gubernatorial campaign fairly late in that campaign. And when I got onto that, into that universe, right, I started seeing some really harmful narratives, specifically in Black communities, that were impacting that campaign pretty substantially. Things online like, hashtag no reparations, no vote, hashtag vote couch, conversations about Black men support, right? And it was so bad that Abrams had felt the need to come out and clarify her stance on reparations that hasn't changed in 2-3 decades, right? It was so bad. We saw this like Black men problem did not start in 2024. It didn't even start in 2022, but we saw the same harmful narrative start spreading, right? The Stacey Abrams have a Black men problem was one of the biggest headlines of that cycle, right? And what the AJC did not realize, what most people did not realize, was that Stacey and Warnock were actually at the exact same level of Black support. And that we were actually seeing happening was a broader Democratic decline and a broader Democratic support decline amongst Black men from 2018 to 2024. And that decline was by like 15 points. And so even though both Abrams and Warnock were well above that level nationally, it was still seen to folks that weren't curious enough about Black voters as some type of detriment of the candidate and not the party. What I also found out in 2022, as someone that was a part of the broader counter disinformation ecosystem, was that there was not a single organization that was dedicated to Black audiences, right? Most other audiences you can name and imagine had many groups or parts of groups or organizations that were focused on understanding how the hyperbolic spread of disinformation was going to impact their communities, but nothing had been set up for, one of the most important constituency and bases in the Democratic Party. And so launched Onyx Impact to fill that massive gap, right? And what the first thing we did was create the first ever landscape of what the online disinformation universe looked like. Who were the folks that were spreading harmful content to Black audiences across the internet? And why did we do this? Because so many Black folks are now getting their news and information online. So not just, and we over-index relative to the broader population of what percent of us are getting our news and information online. And so how these online communities are operating is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. We had a offensive strategy that was both accountability and messaging focused, right? And from an accountability lane, we were identifying harmful actors, taking out, trying to hold these bad actors accountable. We called out the fact that a platform that had millions and millions of Black followers called African Stream was very likely a foreign disinformation campaign targeting Black voters last year. And we called that out in June, and in September, Secretary of State Blinken had a whole press conference on how RT had Russia Today was running two main operations, propaganda operations. One was in Germany and the other one was African Stream. And we helped demonetize that platform to the point where just a few days ago, they announced that they were shutting down permanently, right? But there was also a need to as Tara talks about, we've got to go on offense, right? And so instead of just staying in this weird research bucket that doesn't really have any action to solve the problem, right? We started doing all types of testing on given everything we know about how disinformation works and how disinformation spreads. What types of messaging are going to be most impactful, right? We did a ton of RCT tests to show that, like, we found messages that were moving young Black men by 7-8 points and disaffected young Black men trying to vote, and had a strategy of spreading those messages to as many Black orgs as possible. But what happened was that at the very end of the day, the progressive ecosystem suffers. A lot of the progressive ecosystem suffers from a very similar problem, and that is that the people following them online are likely not the voters we need to reach, right? And so we've got to be able to expand our reach, which is what Onyx Impact is doing this year. We're massively expanding our reach and audience, right? We're using artificial intelligence to help amplify and do massive repetition into the spaces that most need our support. We're running messaging tests to see what exactly is going to work. What disinformation counter tactics can we use? And so we're so excited to be part of this. I'm so excited to talk more about all the types of efforts that we have right now to really, really, really engage with Black voters. And because fundamentally that didn't happen in 2024. It was not the strategy. The strategy was not to engage with minority communities aggressively, right? It was a general population strategy that blew up in all of our faces. And so we need to make sure that never happens again, especially if we're talking about this new media environment. So I'm so happy to talk with Tara and to get the ball rolling here.